Lone Star College is one of the largest community colleges in the nation, serving more than 93,000 students. Our ability to deliver the highest quality education and training to the widest population is always improving. First delivering online courses in 1997, Lone Star College now enrolls more students in online courses than any other college in the nation. In addition to our robust online certificate and degree options, we are the first college in Texas to offer registered apprenticeship programs. As a community college, our mission is to put students on the path to success and advance our entire community, resulting in a $3 billion economic impact in the Houston area. Lone Star College makes education accessible and available to all. We serve the largest Hispanic student population in the nation and are the second largest provider of associate degrees to Hispanic students in the United States. We are committed to bringing value to our students and to the community through the expansion of education. Through innovative and relevant programs, Lone Star College succeeds in its mission, delivering wide-ranging opportunities that change lives.
Educate Texas is an initiative of the Communities Foundation of Texas. We are dedicated to working side by side with our partners to empower students to realize their dreams and fuel a thriving Texas. Visit edtex.org to learn more about our work.
After nearly a decade, we are changing our name to align with our pledge to empower philanthropy to advocate for effective policies for all Texas students from cradle to career. We are Philanthropy Advocates, a collaboration with Educate Texas.
I'm Evan Smith, the CEO of the Texas Tribune, and I want to welcome you to our conversation with Texas Education Commissioner Mike Morath, the latest of our virtual public events. We have, of course, many more events planned for the remaining months of the 87th legislature. For instance, be sure to tune in on Thursday, February 24th at noon when our Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief, Abby Livingston, interviews Congressman Michael McCall of Austin and Mark Vesey of Fort Worth about the impact the Biden administration will have on Texas. The next day, on Friday, February 25th, also at noon, and this is not yet announced, our education reporter, Aaliyah Swaby, will sit down with the newly minted chair of the House Public Education Committee, Harold Dutton. For details about all of our events, go to texastribune.org/events. Commissioner Morath and I will be talking today for about 30 minutes. I'll do my best to incorporate some of the very good questions many of you have submitted in advance. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors: Lone Star College, Texas State Technical College, Harmony Public Schools, Educate Texas, Philanthropy Advocates, Texas 2036, Raise Your Hand Texas, the Texas Association of School Business Officials, the Texas Public Charter Schools Association, the Texas Arts Education Campaign, and Pastors for Texas Children. If you'd like to join the conversation online, please tweet using the hashtag #TTEvents. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mike Morath, the Education Commissioner of Texas, who has the distinction of being our last guest at an in-person Texas Tribune event before the world shut down. He may remember, I certainly do, that I declined to shake his hand as he stepped on stage that morning, March 6th, 2020, because as I joked, Mike Pence would bust through the back door of our event space and put us both in coronavirus jail. Seems a hell of a lot less funny now. Commissioner Morath heads the Texas Education Agency, which oversees pre-kindergarten through high school education for what pre-pandemic was expected to be about 5.5 million students in traditional public schools and charter schools, but is actually about 150,000 south of that in this most complicated of all years. He assumed his post, to which he was first named by Governor Abbott in late 2015 and reappointed in 2019 after serving for more than 4 years as an elected member of the Dallas Independent School District Board of Trustees. Raised in Garland, he is a graduate of George Washington University. Hi, Commissioner. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Commissioner, you are famously in the business, by you I mean the TEA, of giving grades to school districts and schools for their performance. Goose, meet gander. Let's begin by having you grade your own performance over the last year in the middle of the pandemic. How did the agency do? How did you do as commissioner in dealing with the complications of the outbreak of the coronavirus as it affected students, parents, and educators?
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually try to be as reflective as possible in our practices here because the work of public education writ large is actually a work that is focused on improvement. We're in the growth business. What we want to do is grow eager young minds, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, and turn them into self-aware members of the Republic. That is extraordinarily complicated work. What teachers do is quite possibly the most demanding thing I've ever been exposed to in any field. And so it requires a mindset that is constantly looking at what worked, what did not work, and making adjustments along the way. What we have tried to do throughout the crisis is to be as responsive as possible to the field and the ever-changing dynamics that have occurred during this crisis. Whether that's providing guidance on public health, which required us to collaborate with a lot of public health experts around the state and country, whether it was providing actual equipment, huge volume of personal protective equipment, PPE, to keep people safe for on-campus instruction, standing up an entire new rule set so that school districts were fully funded for remote instruction, much like they were fully funded for on-campus instruction. It's been nonstop. So we have done everything that we could think of to support our teachers, our principals, our superintendents, all of our school leaders around the state to make Solomon-esque decisions that they have had to make to both keep education going and keep people safe. So
what's the grade, Commissioner? You give yourself an A, you give yourself a B, you're a tough grader? Are you an easy grader?
Let's call it a B because there's I think there's always work that we have to do to concentrate on in terms of improvement, and I want to make sure that both what I set for myself as a goal for how to support our schools and school leaders and how we at TEA work as a team to support them. I mean, we've got to be relentless. Like, our kids require us to be the absolute best versions of ourselves. So everything requires us to reflect on where we are today and what do we do to get better moving forward.
What is the thing over the last year, Commissioner, that you think we did not do this well enough, and over the next whatever months it is until we get back to something approaching normal, we got to do better at? What is your one miss? You're putting yourself on a performance improvement program.
Yeah, I mean, the work that we have had to try to do to support school systems for remote instruction is probably the single biggest challenge that we've had to address systemically, and what supports we have had to do at TEA. We did, I think, a lot of good there, but I mean, an extra 2 years of prep wouldn't hurt. Right. Nobody expects the global pandemic. So I think the speed with which we were able to roll out supports, if there was some way I could turn back time and increase the speed to give highly effective remote learning training, remote learning tools to as many school systems and teachers and principals as possible, that would have been great. Now, the flip side of that is, what do I think that we did really well? And there was a lot of controversy associated with this back last summer, but we had a lot of preliminary scientific evidence that schools could be operated on campus safely, and we as an organization, we as a state, planted a flag and said we will need to be able to provide on-campus instruction for families who wish that for their children. And it was very controversial at the time, but we had a lot of evidence to indicate that it would be, in fact, the risks could be mitigated. The evidence has become stronger and stronger and stronger since then, that on-campus environments are very safe, all things being equal during the pandemic. You now have President Biden, who says as a key goal, within 100 days, he wants all the schools open. And we've already wrestled with this issue. So we're there on day one of the Biden administration. You have Dr. Fauci saying that the evidence now shows that kids are actually safer. There's less risk of them getting the virus in a school setting than there is from a community spread perspective.
Right.
So, I think that this decision that we made to prioritize access to on-campus instruction, which was not made in a variety of jurisdictions, was criticized for not necessarily being science-based, but it was in fact based on the best evidence we had at the time, and it's proven to be really supported by the evidence. On-campus instruction.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
On-campus instruction in Texas has proven to be extremely safe, and we want to encourage as much on-campus instruction as possible because we know our kids need it.
Yeah, I want to come back to that. I want to come back to the question of schools being open, and specifically to the Biden promise of the first 100 days in a second. But I want to stay with what you said about virtual school, online education. Said you wish we had more time to roll this out. Have you concluded, after whatever it is, 11 months of the pandemic and X number of months of kids instructed this way, that virtual school is an adequate substitute for in-person education?
Well, I think for some children, the answer is clearly no. And for other children, the answer is it's been actually an improvement over the status quo. And then for a group of children, it's basically the same in terms of its efficacy. But, if you had to ask me what the percentage size of that, I think it's been an improvement for a relatively small number of students that are participating in remote instruction relative to what they received in brick and mortar instruction. Right. But it's not absolute, Commissioner. You don't think it's absolute. It's not the same for every kid. I was here listening to, or I saw rather, Governor Gina Raimondo of Rhode Island, who is now apparently going to be the Commerce Secretary in the Biden administration, say the other day on this subject that every day a child is out of school is a problem for that child. And she means out of school as in not in school in person. She's making a blanket statement that every child who is being educated not in person is in some ways seeing learning loss or some negative effects of this. Do you agree with that? So there I think is enough evidence to say that for a group of students, depending upon the operational decisions that were made in terms of the quality and investment in that remote instruction environment, that for a group of students, it's actually proved to be pretty effective. But I think that's a relatively small percentage. So I think I would generally agree with her statement, but I'd not fully agree with her statement. On-campus instruction is where kids need to be the overwhelming majority of the time. And I think, we've learned a lot about this, our ability to deliver instruction remotely. And I think that there is a lot to be said about a future environment for a number of students, especially in the high school side, that will be a hybrid approach to education, where it's partially remote and partially on campus. Basically, we want to allow kids to learn anytime, anywhere.
Right. Yeah,
That will be a.
Please.
I'm sorry.
So that's one of the things we're learning here is that
That's right.
There's going to be a difference after we come back from the pandemic that will be affected by what we learned in this time. Is that right?
Yeah, that's let's not lose sight. There's been much bad about the pandemic, but there has been some good, and the learning that we have collectively accomplished in terms of how to improve instructional quality, curricular rigor, the degree of supports for students in a remote environment, and in thinking alternatively away about the school experience. This will result in really positive change, I think, for students long term. And frankly, we're going to need to make positive change long term, because back to the quote from Rhode Island, there is significant amount of learning loss that we're going to have to adjust and account for to give kids what they morally deserve.
Yeah. What's it going to take on the question of learning loss, Commissioner, to build back out of this? What is it going to take, and how long will it take, in your estimation?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $70 billion question, right? We have a $70 billion public education system in Texas, and let's speak to the how long, and then the what. TEA did some research studies after Hurricane Katrina, because Texas received a variety of a pretty large influx of students from Louisiana from the hurricane, and the study lasted 4 years, and the study found that the districts that did intense interventions were able to get those kids back up to sort of state average in reading in 4 years, and they were never able to catch them up in math. So
never able to catch them.
Never able to. Well, I mean, the study lasted 4 years, so they weren't able to in 4 years. Don't know if it happened after that, but it seems likely to conclude never. So like, this is going to be a multi-year investment in changing our practices to support kids, to give them what they deserve. And if we don't do it, if we aren't successful in making an adjustment, there's another study on this subject that is, I think, deeply troubling. And in Argentina, that because of a teacher strike, they shut down schools for about 3 months in the 80s. And there was no sort of systemic adjustment after school came back. They just came back and picked up where they left off. And what researchers found was that the kids never achieved, like, there's a decline across the board in in their educational outcomes, and economists found a reduction in GDP for 20 years because of the impact of their lost learning opportunity. Yeah. So we have to address this. We have to accelerate.
I suspect
failure is not an option.
You've seen this study recently from professors at Yale and Northwestern, University of Pennsylvania, and I think the University of Amsterdam, that said that 1 year of school closures, they estimate, would cost ninth graders in the poorest communities a 25% decrease in their earning potential out of school. I mean, there's an economic consequence to this, among others, but it begins with the personal loss that these students face, that not being able to build back out of the hole. As you said, 4 years is a long time. Even if that's the best case, it's still a significant long time. And I want to ask you on the question of not every student is the same. You know, there were racial disparities in educational outcomes pre-pandemic, and it seems as if the racial disparities during the pandemic have been exacerbated by the circumstance we're in, that Hispanic and African-American communities in Texas are seeing a much worse go of this than the state in the main. What is TEA doing, or is prepared to do, specifically to address the racial disparities question?
Yeah, I mean, this gets to the heart of what we have to do to address the issue of the achievement gap. And we had an achievement gap walking into the crisis, and the crisis has exacerbated it. And there are a variety of evidence-based practices that we know are good for kids. But I mean, if I kind of summarize the sort of three things that we need to spend more time and attention on than possibly anything else, it's one, it's the nature of the curricular experience. If you think about the Argentina example, you had a bunch of kids that were performing at this level before the crisis. They came back in performing at this level. If the degree of curricular rigor, if the content that we're providing kids, if we adjust it downwards, we will never catch them up. So what we have to ensure is that the resources that we give to our teachers, our instructional materials, the nature of the content experience that kids are exposed to, that we provide the ability to do on grade level instruction while also sort of embedding remediation. And if you go only remediation, or if you go only below grade level, you'll never catch up. We simply won't. So we have to ensure that we spend a lot of time and energy thinking about the nature of the content, the curricular experience that kids have in this. And that is going to have disproportionate benefits for students who are Black, for students who are Hispanic, students who are low income relative to others, because the need to accelerate their learning, this was clear to us pre-pandemic. Second, it's the teacher in the classroom. This is all the law and the prophets hang on how well we love on those who love on our kids. And what we do to support our teachers, to support their professional growth, to even reduce the amount of time that they are spending working. We got teachers who are working regularly, 14, 15-hour days. This is untenable. And so we've got to adjust the nature of the schedule, the nature of the experience that we have set up for them to make this job more tenable by mortals. The work that we do, and there's a variety of things you can do from a staffing pattern perspective to sort of operational adjustments in schools to do that. And if you think about those first two things, like, okay, we got good content and we got good teaching, then we need more of it. And this comes down to, like, there's 172 days in the typical school year in Texas. There are 260 work days in the typical year. That's a lot of time that, if we can give people the gift of time, combined with our investments in ensuring curricular rigor and ensuring teacher support, this will make a huge difference and again, address that issue of the achievement gap by race, by class, very substantially.
You're teeing up the next question perfectly, Commissioner, because what teachers will tell you, what parents will tell you, what students will tell you is that one of the time sucks in a normal year is the preparation for and the administration of the STAAR test. What I heard from people in the run-up to this interview more than any other is, ask Commissioner Morath, why won't he, in this year of all years, cancel the STAAR test? Why won't you cancel the STAAR test?
I think this question gets to the heart of what are our expectations for children. We in Texas, we have this framework built in law that says all children can learn and achieve, and there are specific goals set out for children in every grade level. So, for example, in third grade, we expect every third grader to have memorized their times tables. And that expectation was not picked out randomly. This was a very intentional process over multiple years, because we actually think third graders need to have memorized their times tables in terms of being on the pathway to be prepared for success in life. And if you haven't memorized your times tables, then we have to move heaven and earth to make sure that as soon as humanly possible in your educational progression, that we get to that point. The STAAR test is designed to tell us whether or not kids have learned the grade level content and skills that we expect that they need to know in that subject. And that is what the test does. No more, no less. It tells us, did you master these content areas? And we do this because we know it is extremely important for kids to learn that. And the pandemic has not...
This year of all years, you want to prioritize times tables over the mental health of some of these kids?
We'll get back to the situation in Argentina.
Yeah.
If we don't figure out how to meet our moral commitment to children, then they will have a lifetime of lower outcomes. The back to the ninth graders that will losing a year reduces their life outcomes by 25%. Our expectations can't change for what kids need to learn, because life's expectations for our kids have not changed from this pandemic. The world that our children will grow up into to pursue the American dream, it is an awfully achievement-based world. You got to have these skills. So why then do we do this? It is because that in a time of crisis, we have to use every tool at our disposal, which include, in some cases, objective third-party assessments to diagnose and to build action plans to support our kids. And if we don't know where they are, then how do we know how effectively to support them? How do we know to make these grand sets of changes that we will need to make to honor our moral commitment to children?
So this is a benchmarking tool this year, Commissioner, even though you know that the results on the STAAR test are going to be far below what they might have otherwise been. You're using this as a way to benchmark against the previous year, so you understand, as you've said, the degree of learning loss that you have to recover from.
Absolutely. Right? And I'll put it in very personal terms. I'm a parent as well as a commissioner. My kids are in public school. And my wife and I are now having active conversations about our daughter and whether or not it makes sense to have her repeat the grade level.
Yeah.
Now we get report cards back from the teachers. We talk to parent-teacher conferences, but I want to know summatively where she falls on that spectrum of expectations. This is a key piece of information that I would use to sort of, that my wife and I would use to support our child. Like I think it's critical information for educators and supporting kids, and for parents.
So you're making that choice. You and Mrs. Morath are making that choice for your kid. That's what works right for you. There is a move. If you're going to have a STAAR test, there is a move that Diego Bernal, the former vice chair of the Public Education Committee, Democratic state lawmaker from San Antonio, and essentially half the legislature wrote you a letter earlier this week, bipartisan list of legislators, asking that you give families an opportunity to opt out of the test. Don't have to explain why, but if they believe that their circumstances mean that it would be better for their kid, their family, for the kid to opt out this year, that would be their personal choice, in the same way that you and Mrs. Morath are making your personal choice potentially to have your kid repeat a grade level, given the unusual nature of this circumstance. They have requested that. And Representative Bernal's quote was, the idea of forcing students to go in to take a test that doesn't count, since the STAAR test is not going to count for the A through F ratings this year, is unnecessary. Will you grant them that request to give families and students an opt-out on this test?
So I think some of the nature of the request stems from people actually not understanding all the adjustments that have been made this year. I think the essence of the question comes down to on-campus instruction. We know that the best place for kids to be to learn, for the vast majority of kids, is to be on campus, and we've set the policy landscape up so that we can maximize the number of kids that are on campus. So for kids who are coming in on campus, as we get into the spring, because STAAR test doesn't roll around until April generally. There's a few exceptions to that. Yep. You're on campus, you'll take the STAAR test like you would any other year, and then you'll have access to that information. For families who are still at that point concerned about the public health issues, school districts are able to make a variety of adjustments to ensure that they have access to a safe on-campus testing environment, or a safe proctored campus testing environment. So if a family wants to then, on that day, since they're otherwise remote, if they want to send their kid in that day to get tested, they can. But if the family is still concerned that they want and that they need to remain from remote instruction, then they stay remote instruction that day.
But they're going to still take
their kid won't take the test, and they won't have access to that information. So there'll be a significant reduction in their ability to know where their children are. But
But to be clear, you're saying that if they decide, after all the things you're willing to provide them as alternatives, if you are willing, if they do not want to come back in and do the test, and they don't want to do it remotely, you will give them the option to opt out of it.
It's not opting out of STAAR tests. It's opting for remote instruction. So they will continue experiencing remote instruction. We don't have the logistical ability to do the STAAR remotely, so their kid won't sit for the STAAR exam.
Okay. Let's switch over to the question of funding, Commissioner. This has been a difficult year from the standpoint of enrollment and attendance. As I said earlier, something like 150,000 off of what was a projected enrollment for Texas public schools. This question of hold harmless behind the STAAR test is the thing that I get asked about and was asked to ask you about most frequently. This is the idea that even with drops in enrollment or in attendance, and that is the basis for funding of public education, that schools and school districts should be able to maintain their funding despite any declines. At the end of the year, speaking of letters from legislators, you had a letter from more than half of the House, again bipartisan, asking that the state guarantee funding levels through the remainder of the school year. As I understand it, you had only extended it through the first half of the school year, but there's an open question about the spring semester to give flexibility and financial security to these entities while they're providing academic instruction and adjusting to the pandemic. As I understand it, there's been no decision yet. Is that right?
Oh, that's correct.
Yeah, so time's a wasting. Tell us what you're going to do. These schools and school districts tell me that they are getting ready to budget for next year, and they want to know what the deal is. What can you tell them?
Yeah, there's a lot of complexity in the budgeting process, because you have to know what the funding formulas for public education are writ large. So this is what the legislature meets about, and then you have to know how much money you have coming into the school year from your prior year. So we're trying to ensure that the districts have clarity on this as soon as possible. We're actively sort of working through the the issues related to the both the policy and the financing side on this question of the hold harmless. Again, school districts have been fully funded for remote instruction. They've been fully funded for on-campus instruction. This is about funding for kids that didn't come back to school,
Right.
that they were expecting. And you know, it's the district budgeting process is a big, complicated animal. I mean, I remember this very clearly being on the school board in Dallas. So we want to make sure that they have clarity on this as soon as possible. From a strictly speaking, from a cash flow perspective, all of their actual funding for the year has been funded based upon estimates they provided 2 years ago.
Right, but you know that the question of whether or not they do get to keep funding for the kids who aren't there for whatever the reason, that is a significant amount of money as they see it in their budgets, and they are concerned that if you come back and say, we're going to dock you for those kids, that's going to actually affect their ability to staff up fully and to address the challenges they have heading into the next year.
That's right. And I mean, I think they're rightfully concerned. We have rightfully heard this. We are working on the issue.
So how soon, Commissioner, will you have an answer for you?
I don't know that I can give you a specific date at this point.
Right.
But
did you hear, I interviewed Chairman Larry Taylor of the Senate a couple of weeks ago, and when I asked him this question about hold harmless, he said, well, we want to be sure that these schools and school districts are looking for these kids. And he said, before we address the issue of hold harmless, we'll get to that, but we want to be sure they're looking for these kids. Is that for you a consideration that if you say grace over funding for the balance of the year, do you believe that there's a question of whether the schools or school districts will continue to search for these kids?
I mean, this gets to the heart of of the wisdom of an attendance-based school finance system. So we have actually kind of a mixed school finance system in Texas. Part of our system is funded on enrollment. So, for example, all funding for low-income kids, what's called Comp Ed, is an entirely enrollment-based finance system. Yeah. But we have an ADA, an average daily attendance-based system. So the policy benefit of an attendance-based system is that the school districts have a financial incentive to try to maximize daily engagement for all of their kids. So you think about your most at-risk students, students who are homeless, students who are most significantly at risk of just not coming to school every day. An attendance-based school finance system ensures that the district has got to spend extra effort to bring them in every day. And if you switch to just an enrollment-based system, then they have resources, of course, but they don't necessarily have an incentive. So this is I think the big policy question related tied up into the hold harmless conversation.
Who will decide? Will it be you, Commissioner? Will it be the agency? Will it be legislative leaders? Some combination of you? Who is going to make the call on this?
I will issue the final hold harmless determination. So
again, you can't say exactly when it's going to be. You can't.
Yeah, under statute, it's the commissioner is responsible for using in an emergency for inventing sort of fictional enrollment or fictional attendance, and that's what this hold harmless is.
Let me come back to this question that you brought up earlier of the promise by President Biden to open the majority of our schools by the end of the first 100 days of his administration. You may have heard that actually earlier this week, he walked back from that a little bit. He downgraded that goal, according to his spokesperson, to 50% of schools having some teaching in person at least one day a week. In your mind, is that ambitious enough as a goal?
No, I think the evidence is very clear that our schools are very safe. Again, Fauci has said that it's actually generally safer for students in a school than they're more likely to get the virus from community spread than they are from a school setting. And the educational damage to the student, even the social aspects of it. I've talked to so many parents and educators about high school students who lacked access to their social network because they didn't have access to school for an extended period of time. It's causing significant issues. So we've got to make sure that our schools are open and available to every family that wants them.
Do you sympathize, Commissioner, with the teachers and the non-instructional staff at your schools who are concerned about their own well-being along with the well-being of school kids?
Absolutely. We have to make every adjustment. While we know that the risks for students are extraordinarily low, adults still have they have a different health profile. And I think that it is wise for school districts to attempt to make accommodations for staff. We clearly have a large number of educational staff that are very interested and willing to come and work on campus. And we clearly have a number of educational staff that are deeply worried about their personal health circumstances. So we should make every reasonable accommodation to support that. And in some places, that accommodation can be made relatively easily. So if you think, for example, if 70% of your kids are coming on campus,
Right.
And 30% of your teaching staff wish to be remote, you might be able to make that work in terms of the math without causing too much discomfort. In other cases, it's just a lot harder managerially to make it work.
Commissioner, if you're we have just a couple minutes left. If you're sympathetic to this predicament of teachers and non-instructional staff, why is Texas not prioritizing teachers behind healthcare workers in getting vaccinated? Dr. Peter Hotez, the virologist from Baylor College of Medicine, this morning on Twitter said, with the variants coming, it's really important to vaccinate teachers and staff. Why is the state not doing that?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a committee that's been formed to make vaccine prioritization decisions. I am not a member of that committee.
Do you believe that they should be prioritized?
So, I mean, I can't speak to that. All I can tell you is what the decision.
Well, you could speak to it. You could say what you think, even if you're not on the committee.
Well, under the current framework, which is the sort of 1B prioritization, anyone over the age of 65 and anybody that has a high-risk condition is eligible for a vaccine. So that actually turns out to be a large number of teachers, teachers' aides, custodians, food service workers who work in public education. So we have places where public health has partnered with school districts to ensure that all of the eligible higher risk employees are in fact vaccinated. So I mean, I want every school to be open as quickly as possible, everyone to be back on campus, and everyone to be safe. These are, but I think these are very difficult decisions that have to be wrestled with.
Commissioner, before we go, how long are you in this job for? It's been more than 5 years. I'm sure you feel that every day. And in fact, the last year probably has felt like 5 years in and of itself. I looked it up. You're the longest serving education commissioner in Texas in 30 years. So what do we?
To me.
Well, but that's in fact true. So what do you think? What's a lot of chatter on the street. What's Morath going to do after the session? Are you planning to remain in this job in perpetuity, or are you going to?
Well, perpetuity, no. But I mean, I will say that I get to wake up every day, and I have a job where my entire reason for existence is to try to help 5.5 million souls in Texas public schools. Like, this is, I mean, the job has some serious downsides, don't get me wrong, but this is the best opportunity on the planet to try to make a difference, to live a life of purpose, to help all. I mean, the reason I ran for the school board in the first place, I remember very clearly that I was a big brother, part of the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, and I had mentored a kid for I think 5 years at that time. He turned 16. He wanted to apply for a job at Brahms, and he could not fill out the job application without my help. His level of literacy was insufficient. And I never want that to happen to any more of my brothers and sisters. So, like, I have the opportunity to try to do something about that. So I will keep doing this as long as they let me.
Okay, well, that's an answer, actually. Okay, good. Commissioner, we're out of time. I wish we had much more time to talk about stuff in detail, but I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for tuning in. Thanks again to our sponsors. If you're going to ride along with us during this legislative session of ours, please pay attention to the Texas Tribune's coverage of our legislature, our great reporting. Visit texastribune.org or sign up to get the latest news in your inbox at trib.it/ledge. Remember our event on the 24th with Congressman Michael McCall, Mark Vesey, and Abby Livingston. See you then. See you soon. Please stay safe, everybody. Thank you.